Lately, I've noticed something, and honestly, it's kind of disturbing. More and more Gen Z clients are showing up in therapy, bright, funny, emotionally intelligent people who feel like they're barely hanging on. And what's wild is it's becoming normal. Constant stress, total burnout, feeling behind in life, feeling guilty for not being healed enough, feeling like no matter how much they know about mental health, they still can't keep it together. This isn't rare. It's not dramatic. It's everywhere. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation, because the stress Gen Z is under is not the same stress their parents had. Social media, digital exhaustion, economic chaos, the pressure to be everything by 25, the systems that are supposed to help you, broken. The coping tools everyone talks about, outdated. Gen Z knows what they're feeling, but no one's showing them what to actually do with it. So in this episode, we're digging into what's really going on, from constant comparison and emotional overload to toxic productivity, the myth of being behind, and how to finally set boundaries without guilt. If you've ever thought, why am I still struggling when I've done everything right? This one is for you. Let's break it all down. Hi, I'm Robin Shannon, licensed clinical professional counselor and founder of Chicago Healing Connection. I'm a group therapy practice based out of Chicago. In our practice, we specialize in relationship therapy, adult attachment, and mental health support for individuals, couples, and families. So my team and I see clients navigating so much. Things like uncertainty, disconnection, burnout, and I really think no generation embodies that tension more than Gen Z. This generation is growing up with more emotional language, mental health awareness than really any previous generation before, and yet they're often drowning in it. They're connected to everyone all the time, and yet they still feel so deeply alone. They're told to hustle, heal, do all the things, but really no one has ever taught them how to really slow down. And that's what I'll be talking about today, is why Gen Z is really feeling so overwhelmed and what can actually help. Because despite what people say, Gen Z isn't really fragile or weak. They're just wired differently, and they're just carrying things many of us have never been able to or really had to name before. So the biggest thing I notice is that Gen Z is constantly having to be on, right? They're juggling pressures from every direction, including social media, political instability, climate anxiety, job market chaos, and even just trying to be okay in a world that rarely feels safe, right? Older generations, yes, they did have stress, but there was often a lot more emotional privacy, more moments of quiet. Gen Z is exposed to so much, so fast, and so young. And so many of them have really never had a chance to be just kids or teenagers. Another thing, they're also carrying a lot of generational trauma without always having a lot of tools to navigate that. So they're expected to be emotionally intelligent, socially conscious, self-aware, and high achieving, all while still having to figure out who they are in the process. So that can be a lot. So social media has really created a 24/7 window into other people's lives. And for Gen Z, it often becomes a mirror that they hold up for themselves. So there's constant comparison, but it's really a distorted version. And so it makes it hard for them to know where other people end and where they begin. So when they're constantly consuming other people's like highlight reels, you really start to question your own worth, your own pace, even your personality, right? So many Gen Z clients say that they feel like they're living their lives with an imaginary audience watching and judging every move, right? So that constant surveillance, feeling they need to perform, whether that's real or perceived, it creates this chronic stress and erodes that self-trust. So they rarely get a break to really tune into themselves without wondering how it will be perceived. And even the rest can feel performative, right? Did I do enough self-care? Did I do it right? Should I post about it? And it becomes this kind of loop that they get stuck in. So the work is really about helping them find spaces and moments where they're not being seen or judged or measured and evaluated or having to perform, but they can just be by themselves to feel and understand and know themselves. So relearning that rest, privacy, and disconnecting are not selfish, that they are vital, is super important. So really, uncertainty is one of the defining emotional climates for Gen Z. They're stepping into adulthood with housing instability, rising inflation, college debt, news headlines that forecast doom all the time, right? I mean, we're talking about a world epidemic, right? So the world feels less dependable, less predictable. So it's no wonder many of them struggle with decision-making or even planning for the future, right? So that kind of instability doesn't just create fear, it creates fatigue. It's just like their nervous systems are on high alert all the time. And when the future feels so unpredictable, it can feel safer not to hope too much. So they may underfunction and procrastinate, and not out of laziness, but really out of self-protection. So if I don't expect too much, I can't be disappointed. So in therapy, we try to really help them create small zones of stability, right? Places where there's continuity. Even something as simple as having a morning routine, setting weekly intentions, grounding practices can give them something solid to hold on to when everything else feels like shifting sand. They are emotionally overwhelmed. Gen Z has really grown up in the age of mental health language, right? We see buzzwords such as, narcissism, triggers, trauma, right? These are all kind of buzzwords. They can name their anxiety. They can identify attachment wounds. They can spot red flags with impressive precision, right? But naming the problem isn't the same as knowing how to really hold it or heal it. So what's missing for many is what I call emotional scaffolding, right? Or the support structures that really help you process and navigate what you're feeling. Just because someone can tell you what trauma is doesn't mean that they know what to do when it shows up in their body, or how to navigate it in relationships, right? When it does show up in those moments, right? So the other piece is that emotional awareness is often downloaded from social media, right? So short form, bite-sized content like TikToks, YouTube videos. While that content can be validating, it rarely gives the full picture or real practical tools. So they're left with this emotional overload and no container to process it in. That's where therapy, coaching, or even just deep grounded friendships can become super important. So one of the biggest traps is that all or nothing thinking, right? It sounds like if I can't do it perfectly, I won't do it at all. If I'm not as far along as my peers, I'm failing. I messed up once, so I'm a mess up, right? Another is comparison overload, right? They're not just comparing themselves to people in their lives. They're comparing themselves to influencers and creators, thought leaders, and people from around the world, right? And it's constant comparison. Then there's that productivity trap, the idea that your worth is tied to how much you accomplish and achieve, right? So rest becomes this guilt-inducing thing. Play feels unproductive. Self-care feels productive. Rest feels unproductive. And burnout becomes this badge of honor, right? Really, it becomes this big flex, right? So we work on unhooking from these thought loops, learning to live in the gray, right? In the ambiguity, in the process, to embrace process and progress over perfection, and to talk back to those internalized messages that say that you're only as good as what you produce. So many Gen Z clients are really skeptical of anything that feels performative or overly polished, including therapy. They want real grounded support. The strategies that work best are the ones that meet them where they are, not where we think they should be. So this may look like micro practices, right, that take less than 5 minutes, right? Things that they can practice in small bits. Things like closing your eyes and placing one hand on your heart and one on your belly, and naming what you feel without judgment, naming what's coming up in your body. Things like that. I'm really just kind of tuning in, setting intentional screen breaks during the day that are tech-free, eating for 10 minutes. Not everything has to be this full digital detox to be effective, but just like bite-sized, baby steps. Connecting through creative outlets, music, poetry, voice memos, even memes. A lot of emotional expression of Gen Z happens outside of words. So I often validate that. You're also reframing self-care as also community care, encouraging mutual check-ins, accountability buddies, co-working spaces, so healing doesn't have to feel often so isolated. Most importantly, we remind them you don't have to buy your healing, right? You don't need a candle, a subscription, or a perfect routine to take care of yourself. So sometimes coping starts with just doing that next kind thing for yourself, right? Being gracious to yourself, finding these opportunities to do something different, and letting that be enough for now. So emotional boundaries are one of the most powerful tools Gen Z can learn to use in a world where DMs, group chats, content are, they're coming at them nonstop. Having a personal off switch is essential, right? So setting boundaries might mean letting friends know I don't usually respond to messages after 9 p.m. It may mean pausing push notifications on Sundays to have one day that's not hyper connected, choosing not to engage with certain topics online because they're too emotionally charged or draining. And that's and feeling like that's valid, right? We also work on internal boundaries, the boundaries we set with ourselves, like recognizing when you're doom scrolling, right? And gently redirecting yourself, reminding yourself that someone else's urgency doesn't mean you have to drop everything. So practicing emotional boundaries isn't just about becoming disconnected. It's about creating space to feel like yourself again, to reground yourself, right? And to tune into yourself. So resilience doesn't always look like bouncing back quickly or putting on a brave face. For Gen Z, it often looks like pausing instead of spiraling, right? Or asking for help instead of isolating, or choosing small, consistent habits instead of these dramatic overhauls or grand gestures, right? So it's waking up and drinking water when everything feels heavy. It's sending a text that says, I'm not okay, instead of disappearing. It's letting go of the idea that healing has to look like progress every day, right? Sometimes it may feel like a step forward. Some days it may feel like a step back, but being okay with the journey. We talk a lot about building resilience by returning to your values consistently. What matters most to you? Is it creativity, justice, kindness? Centering those things can anchor you when everything else feels unstable. And just like strength training, resilience is built through repetition, through practice, small actions, everyday grace. Gen Z has been raised in a culture that prizes grinding and going it alone, but also one where loneliness is at an all-time high. So building community starts with that unlearning that needing people is weak, right? It's okay to need friends. It's okay to want friends and want community. So I often say you don't have to be everything to everyone, but you do need people who can hold space for the real you, not the filtered version or the curated version. Emotional safety grows in spaces where there's consistency, compassion, and healthy boundaries. So Gen Z can start by reaching out to one person with intention instead of trying to manage 10 surface level connections, right, in relationships. So creating regular check-ins with friends is a good way. Talking about consent in emotional conversations. Hey, do you have the capacity for something heavy right now, instead of just like dumping, right? Or what may feel like dumping. Community isn't just who you hang out with. It's also who helps you breathe easier, who helps you still stay grounded in who you are. So if you feel behind, I want you to know that your timeline is yours, right? It's sacred and your process is not late, right? Your journey is your journey. We live in a world that constantly pushes timelines, right? So you graduate by 22, married by 30, own a home by 35, start a nonprofit by 37, but those timelines weren't built for everyone, especially not in the economy and social climate that Gen Z has inherited. Right. So instead of asking, am I behind? Try asking, am I becoming more and more aligned with who I want to be and who I feel I'm meant to be? Because that's the real marker of growth. Right. So you're allowed to take detours. You're allowed to make mistakes and pivot. Right. You're allowed to rest and you're allowed to grow slowly. Right. No one else can live your life. So you really have to give yourself a lot of grace to live it well and not just fast. So thank you so much for watching and spending this time with me. If you've made it this far, I hope you're walking away not just with more understanding, but more compassion for yourself or someone you love. At Chicago Healing Connection, we believe healing happens in connection with yourself, with others, and with your purpose. So if you're Gen Z and feeling the weight of the world, know this, that you're not broken, you're human, and you don't have to carry everything alone, right? If anything I shared resonated, feel free to check out our work at chicagohealingconnection.com, or share this with someone who might need a little hope today, because healing doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. It just has to be real, So take care of yourself and take your time.